It's time! It's time! You like that? You like that? Woo!
It's waxing Lyrical, baby.
Hello, Waxers, and welcome to Waxing Lyrical with Mains and Duts. I'm your host, Mains, and my colleague is probably still asleep. You're wondering why he's still asleep? Well, that's because he's in the UK, and I am not. I'm in India at the moment with work. Yes, that's right. Pale ginger guy in India. Crack as many jokes as you like. They're all valid. Yeah, it's hot. Yeah, so's the food. But I'm okay and I'm surviving, and I'm actually enjoying it. But that doesn't mean that Waxing Lyrical stops. However, due to the fact that Neil never has signal in Rainford, the thought of doing a transmission between Pune in India, Rainford, and the fact that we have 3 guests this week, it was seen best that I do the intro and the exit and Neil does the interviews. I think he did that because he doesn't like to be shown up by me, but that's a different story for another time, which I'm sure we'll talk about next week, especially as you will see in one of the interviews, he suggested I couldn't be bothered to be with him. This week, 3 great interviews from Neil, and surprisingly, none of them related to the Philadelphia Eagles. In fact, one team, the first one, is with Marcus Mosher, who's from Locked On Cowboys, and we are talking Cowboys, a Washington and Philadelphia type show, talking Cowboys, and almost positively as well. We then have Dave Birkett from the Detroit Free Press talking all things Lions and NFC North. And finally, we have one of our favourite guests, although I need to send some flowers to, Mr. Matt Harmon, talking all things wide receivers. That's enough from me, because I'm on free Wi-Fi in a hotel and we never know how long that's going to last. So let's get on with the interviews and I'll speak to you at the end.
Neil Dutton, our boy, the Dut Bomb.
Delighted to be joined now by Marcus Mosher. You can follow him on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He's the host of the Locked On Cowboys podcast and is also a regular co-host of the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast. Marcus, thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Neil.
Absolutely. As I say, we brought you on because I want to talk about the Dallas Cowboys in my attempts to appeal to a wider audience, not just Eagles fans. I want to start obviously with the top. The top is the most important position, obviously the quarterback. And there's been speculation that the Cowboys will pay Dak Prescott what he's worth when it is that time. Given that he struggled towards the back end of last season, are there any lingering doubts about him being the long-term future, or is this Dak's team until otherwise?
I don't think inside the building there's any doubt that he's the franchise quarterback. But on the outside of people who follow this team and who really break down this film and watch it, I think there are reasons to be concerned. But yeah, inside the organization, among his teammates, among the coaches, they think Dak is the real deal. They believe releasing Des Bryant, changing the offense to be a little bit more Dak friendly, should improve his numbers this year. And with Tyron Smith coming back at left tackle, the selection of Connor Williams at 50 to play left guard, they believe Dak is in for a monster season. So we will see. I think this year is going to be massive in terms of how he plays and how that factors into his contract negotiations. If he has another year where he's 90 quarterback rating or above, I think you can expect him to get $28-29 million a year. But if he's closer to what we saw in the second half of the season last year, I don't know. There's going to be a lot of questions then.
I mean, because obviously he wasn't a first-round draft pick. He was the 4th round, I believe. So he doesn't have that draft capital to fall back on if he does look like he's struggling.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, they love Prescott. There's no doubt about it. Jerry Jones has mentioned over and over how this has been a miracle that he's fallen into the lap. So I don't think they're concerned about where he was drafted or any of that kind of stuff. But, I mean, listen, if you're going to look at this objectively, if he struggles again this year, there's really no reason that you should pay him $20+ million a year. Maybe he should get a contract that's similar to an Andy Dalton or a player of that caliber. So it's a massive year for him in his contract coming up next year.
Obviously, another major piece of the offense is Ezekiel Elliott. He obviously wasn't there he wasn't there for a large chunk of last season, but he should see a large workload again in 2018. Should he get injured again, I'll be positive and just say that he'll get injured, not suspended. How confident are you that Rod Smith, Bo Scarborough, and Tavon Austin could replicate his production?
Well, it wouldn't be Tavon Austin. They believe he's going to be their space back. They call them the web back for the whatever back. He's going to be primarily a screen jet sweep type of player. Bo Scarborough is a guy that needs a lot of work. He's an athletic freak. He's got production at Alabama, but he really needs to prove that he can stay healthy. Rod Smith is the guy they really love. He backed up Ezekiel Elliott at Ohio State. He came into the league as a fullback, played a little H-back for Dallas, and last year was his first full year at running back. He was really good in the last 6 games of the season. They believe he's got starting running back potential. If Zeke went down, I think you would see Rod Smith handle a majority of the carries.
Obviously, we move on to the other position. The big news, obviously, you mentioned earlier, was Des Bryant being released. Do you think the Cowboys could have gone about the whole business better, considering how late they actually got round to finally releasing him?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any question they could have went about it better. I mean, this is your all-time franchise leader in touchdowns. If you were going to release him, and the fact of the matter is they knew that they were going to release him after the season, you could have done so. That way he could have jumped on the free agent market a little sooner. It wasn't fair to Dez, and you're seeing the consequences of it now. He's still in free agency. Guys like Brandon Marshall are being assigned ahead of him. Listen, this is a move to help Prescott. Prescott didn't push Dak out the door, or push Dez out the door, but he didn't necessarily save him either. This was a move to basically get more route runners on the field, and let's hope that Dak can thrive without his number one option over the last 2 years.
You've made mention that the Cowboys started their draft preparation ridiculously late. Is there a worry that the Bryant decision is just another factor that essentially the Cowboys the front office tend to treat the off-season as an off-season when they should actually be still working?
Well, it was an interesting offseason for a couple different reasons. We know in Dallas that the coaching staff has a large say in what happens in free agency and in the draft. This year, the Cowboys had a large number of coaches that left on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. They took the first couple months of the offseason to kind of reshuffle their coaching staff. And then by that time, it was time to get ready for the draft and free agency. And they were a little bit behind in the process. We know the story about Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones going on a family vacation. They also had the unfortunate death of Jason Garrett's father, which kind of set them back a little bit. We know that they didn't have their first couple draft meetings until April. I just didn't think they had any idea what they wanted to do with Dez. It's my belief that if Allen Hurns wasn't released in Jacksonville and signed with the Cowboys late in the free agent process, Dez Bryant would still be a Cowboy right now.
Michael Gallup would seem to have one of the best chances of any rookie wide receiver to make an immediate impact on any team in the league. What are your expectations for him this season? Do you see him becoming almost the number one, or is he going to have to learn behind the likes of Allen Hurns and Terrence Williams?
Well, I still think Allen Hurns is going to be the number one receiver on this team. You see in OTAs, he's moving around as the X, the Z, the slot receiver. He's really the guy that they're making the focal point of the offense. Terrence Williams has not been around because he broke his foot early this offseason, and now he has to deal with the arrest. If Williams is not on the roster or can't play early in the season, I do expect Gallup to get a heavy workload. They really love his competitiveness. They love that he can play all over the field. They like what he can do after the catch. I'm not sure he's going to get a big workload as a rookie, but I do think as the season goes along, they're going to try to give him more snaps to see how he handles it.
I mean, he could be helped by the fact that, as we've seen with the Cowboys since Scott Linehan came in, obviously, and since they drafted Zeke Elliott, is that they will lean more heavily on the ground game. So even if Gallup was to see, I don't know, say a 15% market share, of targets, it
Sure.
wouldn't be the same as a 15% market share in Green Bay or Detroit or something like that.
Now, the one thing I will say is Dallas has a lot of red zone targets that are available. We know Terrence Williams has never been a red zone guy. Dez isn't there. Jason Witten's not there. Alan Hearns is okay in that area. I think Gallup might be the most natural red zone receiver on the roster. So if he can establish that role early on in the season, I think there will be some fantasy value there.
You mentioned obviously another name that won't be there, Jason Witten, who retired just immediately before the draft, whatnot. How do you see the Cowboys tackling his absence with the tight ends on the roster they have? You mentioned recently that as much as preseason DFS players seem to love Rico Gathers, the Cowboys may not be as so high on him.
Yeah, Rico is an interesting case because for the fantasy players out there, we care about these big athletic guys that show receiving ability. But that's just not the way Dallas wants to win. They want to win on the ground, and that means that you've got to block. For Dallas, that likely means that Blake Jarwin, Jeff Swaim, and Dalton Schultz, the tight end they drafted in the 4th round, are going to get the opportunities over Rico. I will kind of be shocked if Rico makes the roster. It just doesn't seem like a fit for him. I think there's other teams that he could go on to and thrive, and I think that's going to happen. I'm just not sure it's going to be in here at Dallas. I think they're going to use a tight end by committee approach, similar to what they're doing at receiver.
So, obviously, based on that, they want a tight end majorly to block. Does that mean then that the idea that the Eagles jumped ahead of them to take Dallas Goedert, do you not think that was ever likely to happen? Do you not think even if he'd been there, the Cowboys would have taken him?
No, when the Cowboys were sitting there at 50, they had two guys in mind, Connor Williams, the tackle from Texas, and Justin Reed, the safety from Stanford. As much as people want to believe Dallas Goedert was an option, I'm told that it wasn't. It was pretty early on in the 2nd round that they targeted Connor Williams, and that ended up being the selection.
But it's a good story for Eagles fans, though, to say that they took him ahead of the Cowboys. Famously, one of the main reasons that was given by some for drafting Ezekiel Elliott was that it would help the defence. Do you think the Cowboys have done enough to do this without relying on Zeke, considering he's got enough on his plate, or is this going to be another season of asking Rod Marinelli to prove that he actually is a wizard?
Well, Rod Marinelli is a wizard. I mean, he is phenomenal. You can just send him any kind of defensive lineman, and he's going to get those guys to produce. I do think, in a way, I think Zeke is going to get a ton of touches, and I think he's going to help the defense out a lot because he's going to shorten these games. But I do think the defense is improving. I think they've got a lot of talent in their front 7. They've got a lot of young kids in their secondary, but their front 7 should be significantly improved this year. They took Leighton Vander Esch in the 1st round, the linebacker from Boise State. Sean Lee is returning. Jalen Smith is now in his 2nd full year of playing. I think it's going to be a good group. My concern is that if they ever get behind in the game, this passing game won't be good enough to get them out of trouble and get them ahead. But if the Cowboys can play this game script of running the ball effectively and bending but not breaking on defense, I think they can have some success.
You mentioned obviously getting into trouble. A player who has shown a willingness to get into trouble has been Randy Gregory. How far on is he in terms of reinstatement, do you know?
Well, he has 20 months of negative tests, which is good. He has a couple different current players that are meeting with Roger Goodell to talk about his application. He turned it in a couple weeks ago, and now we are on the clock. We're 60 days away from seeing what happens with him. If he can get back on the field, that might be the most naturally gifted pass rusher the Cowboys have in their entire roster. We will see. I'm not holding my breath for Randy Gregory, but from everybody I talked to and everything that I've heard, it's going very, very well.
Obviously, the Cowboys have invested a lot of time and money in Jason Garrett as a head coach. How bad a season would it have to be for him to be under real pressure? Or do you see, again, that he's just going to carry on clapping on the sideline as happily as he usually is?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. Everybody wants to know, what does Jason Garrett have to do to save his job? I would like to believe he needs to make the playoffs to keep it, but I don't think that's true. I think as long as it's not a total dumpster fire or disaster, and they're not picking in the top 5, I think they're going to stick around. I think the coordinator Scott Linehan and Rob Marinelli could potentially be gone, but Jason Garrett is a guy that Jerry Jones loves. So I guess I don't see him leaving unless something terrible happens this year.
Moving away from the Cowboys onto yourself, how are you enjoying your regular co-host role with friend of our show, Mr. Kelly?
See, the funny thing with Matt is we agree on almost everything football-wise. It's when we get to the mansion lifestyles is where we disagree the most. Like, his love of cheese, of like Parmesan cheese, is just disgusting. And the way that he shaves and all this kind of stuff, it takes a toll on you. But when we get to the football part of the show, it's fantastic. So it's good and bad.
I mean, obviously, you hear the show and the mansion lifestyle trip. They're hitting you right in the face right from the get-go. Does he rehearse them or does he just know them?
Well, it depends. Sometimes it's just like right before the show, he'll ask me, "Do you like macaroni and cheese?" And I'm like, "No." Okay, well, what about it? And he just jumps right into it. I think he must stand around his house all day long practicing and rehearsing these because I never have an idea of what he's going to start off the show with. Matt's an interesting one.
That should just be, you should just put that, on his Twitter bio, an interesting one, a direct quote from yourself.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Say that again.
I was going to say he should just put that on his Twitter bio, an interesting one. Quotes Marcus Mosher.
Yes.
Well, Marcus, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I say you can follow Marcus on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Is there anything you've got coming out on any platform that you'd like to tell anyone about, Marcus?
Yeah, on June 1st, I have the Dallas Cowboys roster guide coming out. It's 75 scouting reports of full color, 1,000 words per player. I'm going to be selling that. And you guys can find that on Twitter. $4.99, 10% of the proceeds will go to the Lymphoma Cancer Center to beat cancer. So just take a look out for that. We try to break down every single player, metrics, advanced stats, spider charts, all that kind of stuff. So just be on the lookout for that, guys.
That's fantastic. Marcus, thanks very much, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, Neil.
Neil Dutton, our boy, the Dut Bomb.
Delighted to be joined now by Dave Birkett of the Detroit Free Press. You can follow him on Twitter at Dave Birkett. That's Birkett. Dave, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Glad to be here. How are you doing?
I'm very, very well indeed. We'll get straight into it. Obviously, the Detroit Lions, under a new head coach, Matt Patricia, after Jim Caldwell left. Have you noticed any drastic changes in the atmosphere and the culture around the team in the first few weeks of the Patricia reign? Obviously, it was quite troubled for him a few weeks ago, but is there anything that you've noticed startlingly different since he took over?
Well, I got to say we haven't been around the team a whole heck of a lot this offseason yet in terms of being, behind the doors. So it's a little tough to tell, but I'll give you one little anecdote, I guess, that one of the assistant coaches brought up the other day. He said you walk into the building, I don't know exactly where this is, but he said you walk into the building and there's a "Do Your Job" sign. And I just thought that was pretty telling because that's, the Patriots motto, obviously, the Patriots do your job, Bill Belichick's saying for a while. And everybody, thought that when you hire Matt Patricia, when you hire Bob Quinn, you're going to have a lot of New England Patriots sort of tie-ins, and that's certainly one of them that I think is pretty evident. That they've adopted the New England Patriots slogan for their own, or they're utilizing it for their own. So, look, I think you're going to see a lot of changes on the defensive side of the ball, and it remains to be seen, exactly how different that locker room will be, if it'll be looser, tighter, what. But early impressions of Patricia so far, I think, have been favorable, at least from the players.
Obviously, he took it's quite unusual step now, I think you'd say, of retaining Jim Bob Cooter as offensive coordinator. Obviously, must have been a temptation to bring in his own guy. Do you see, obviously, Matt Stafford in the last few years has done very, very well under Jim Bob Cooter. Do you see any reason why we shouldn't expect more of the same this year from the offense?
No, I think you're right. I think Matthew Stafford has shown some growth here the last couple of years, 2.5 years really, since Cooter took over as offensive coordinator. And the Lions certainly wanted to continue. Stafford spoke out in favor of Cooter way back when the coaching search was beginning back in January. So I think that was an important part of the equation as to why Matt Patricia kept him. Obviously, Patricia coming in late as well. I think it's maybe you don't want to make some wholesale changes, especially when you have a good thing going offensively. But the one thing I do think you'll see a little bit more of this year is the run game, an area that they struggled under Jim Caldwell. I mean, the 4 seasons that Jim Caldwell was the head coach, 2.5 again of those were with Cooter as offensive coordinator. The Lions, they were the worst rushing team in the NFL over that time. And this offseason, obviously, the Lions, they spent a first-round pick on an offensive lineman, their second-round pick on a running back. They signed LeGarrette Blount in free agency. There's no doubt that this team wants to be able to run the ball better and be a tougher team and sort of establish, their dominance that way, along with Matthew Stafford's own.
I mean, I'd say they used a second-round pick on Kerryon Johnson, a completely unrelated thing. I was doing some research earlier, looking at the Lions and their recent high-round running backs that were between 2010 and 15, they drafted 3 running backs in the top 60. It was Javid Best, Mikel Lashaw, and Amir Abdullah, and they've combined, I think it's 798 carries, just over 3,000 yards at 3.76 yards per carry. So Kerryon Johnson doesn't have an awful lot to do to be better than that, I would have thought.
Yeah, no, it hasn't been pretty, the Lions' history of running backs here. And I'll give you another stat. Sometimes the Lions haven't ranked in the top half of the NFL in rushing since Barry Sanders last season in the league, which sort of tells you how bad they've been running the football. So they're counting on Kerryon Johnson. They're counting on LeGarrette Blount to play big roles. And I think another thing to know about, everybody's sort of wondered so far what role is Kerryon Johnson going to have and how big of a part is he going to play in the offense. And, the Lions rightfully are sort of taking a wait-and-see approach. He needs to win himself a spot in the rotation. It's not just going to be handed to him. But there's no doubt when you trade up to get a running back that early in the draft, you have high expectations for him. And all you have to do is look at the running backs that NFL teams have traded up for in the first 3 rounds recently. That's guys like, Melvin Gordon and Delvin Cook and Elvin Kamara and, Kareem Hunt and Kerryon would be the 5th one in the last couple seasons. So if he can approximate any of those guys' production, the Lions will be quite happy with that draft pick.
Obviously, to say the running game hasn't been effective for many years, but one person who has been particularly effective since joining the Lions has been Golden Tate. He's going into the last year of his contract, I believe. Has there been any movement on the part of the Lions towards a new deal for Tate, or is this something that's going to maybe drag into the season?
Not yet. No movement yet. I think it could happen at some point this summer. It's been Bob Quinn's history is that, after they get through training camp, that's sort of when contract negotiations heat up with some of the guys. I mean, Darius Slay, Theo Riddick a couple years ago, Matthew Stafford last year. They got Glover Quinn done last year as well. So I would keep an eye on it this summer. The Lions still do have Ziggy Ansah on the franchise tag that they need to figure out if they're going to sign him long term. And then it's a little bit of a mystery as to exactly what Golden Tate is looking for. I talked to him about that a couple weeks ago, and he certainly said his eyebrows were raised when Jarvis Landry got the long-term deal that he got with the Cleveland Browns. And maybe, if Golden Tate wants that sort of money, I think he would price himself out of the Lions price range. But I think Golden also realizes that this will be his 3rd contract. He's 30 years old, so maybe he's not quite in the same situation as Jarvis Landry is. So the two sides can find a sort of happy medium there. I think a deal could get done, but right now it's too early to say whether that's going to happen one way or another.
Another member of the wide receiving corps who a lot of people, especially in fantasy football, were very big on last year was Kenny Golladay. He flashed at times, but obviously he missed sometimes due to injury. Marvin Jones had an excellent season. Marvin Jones' numbers, though, if you actually look at the games when Golladay didn't play, he became a much bigger part of the offense. Do you see a Golladay taking a big step forward this year, or to basically becoming, essentially making this a three-way committee with Tate and Marvin Jones, or is he still very much the third man in a partnership of two with Tate behind Tate and Jones?
Yeah, I think they'll use those three guys heavily this year, and Galladay's probably still the number 3 wide receiver for now when it comes to production this fall. But I wouldn't discount what he can bring to the field. I mean, the Lions liked what they saw last year. He's a big body, get downfield. He's certainly a little bit different than Golden Tate, and his size is a little bit different than Marvin Jones too. So I think those guys, they'll work well together. They all stay healthy. I would expect they all top 50 or 60 catches. And yeah, Kenny Galladay is going to play a pretty big role on offense for the Lions this fall.
Obviously, former first-round draft pick Eric Ebron is now no longer with the team. Who do you see as like the front runner to replace him as like the main tight end? And do you see whoever that is having as much a role as Ebron did towards at least the end of last season?
Well, I think that's where some of Galladay's production is going to come from, frankly. That the Lions will use that third receiver a little bit more than they did the tight end in previous years. So, I don't know. Ebron, he had over 50 catches each of the last 2 seasons, over 60 catches a couple years ago. Luke Wilson is going to enter the fall as the number 1 tight end. He's never had more than, I think, it's about 25 catches in his career. And frankly, the 3 tight ends that the Lions have, Luke Wilson, Michael Roberts, and Levine Tuilolo, they combined for 31 catches last year. And you're looking at Ebron, who had almost double that. So I don't think the Lions are going to get the same production out of their tight end, but I think they're going to use those guys in different ways. Wilson's a bigger guy. He's going to be a red zone threat. You're going to see him play quite a bit. He's maybe a little bit more well-rounded than Ebron, but not the same sort of downfield threat. So, he's going to play a big role on offense, but I wouldn't expect him to put up the numbers that Ebron did.
And moving on to the other side of the ball, as you say, the part where Matt Patricia really was brought in to make a difference. What changes, of any changes that have been made on the off-season with the draft or any free agents brought in, who do you think are the key acquisitions to try and improve the Lions defensively in 2018?
Yeah, it's funny. I think the Lions' biggest, free agent addition in the defense or, acquisition, whatever it would be Matt Patricia. I mean, it's just, they're counting on him to bring some of the magic that he had with the New England Patriots to Detroit, and it's going to be a different looking defense this year. It's going to, they'll play some 3-man front, they'll play some 4-man front. They're going to mix some things up. They're going to bring pressure from different ways, and they're really counting on Matt Patricia to have a big impact on that side of the ball. I think, player-wise, Devon Kennard, their outside linebacker, he was their biggest free agent signing of the offseason. He's going to be an every down player for them. He's going to play outside linebacker. He's going to rush from sort of a stand-up end position. I think you pair him with Jared Davis and with Christian Jones, the third linebacker, and that's just a completely different looking unit than the one they had last year. So you should see all 3 of those guys play quite a bit this fall. But I think in terms of statistics, Kennard's the guy that probably going to end the season with 5 or 6 sacks and have a couple fumble recoveries. And when you look up at the end of the day, you might say, that guy's a pretty decent player.
Looking at the rest of the NFC North, obviously it was a strange season last year. Obviously, the Vikings went to the NFC title game. The Packers disintegrated without Aaron Rodgers. The Bears were awful, but we'll blame John Fox for that. And suddenly, an awful lot has changed this off-season, and it looks like one of the tougher divisions in the whole NFC, if not the entire NFL. What do you think would be seen as a successful season for Matt Patricia in 2018?
Well, look, they fired Jim Caldwell because he didn't make the playoffs last year, and they said they thought they were better than their record at 9-7. So I think it's right for fans to expect them to go to the playoffs and maybe make some noise and win their first playoff game since 1991. I wouldn't be predicting that myself, but look, those are the expectations that the Lions put upon themselves. So I think it's fair to expect that. Now, when I look at the Lions and I look at the NFC North, I see the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings as the favorites in this division. I don't think the Lions are that far off. I don't think the Packers are that complete a team. They just happen to have the best quarterback on the planet. I think the Lions have a pretty good, quarterback and maybe a better all-around roster. So I think the Lions will be right in that same mix that they were in past years. 8, 9, maybe 10 wins if things break their way, and maybe they could get to the playoffs if they have a little bit of luck on their side.
It is ironic considering the criticism that he got early in his career that as we go into 2018, Matthew Stafford is the more durable quarterback, considering Aaron Rodgers is starting to get just a little bit injury prone, whereas Stafford is, he's on what he probably, I don't think he has the longest, but he's certainly got one of the longest Ironman streaks among NFL quarterbacks.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's 112 games or so for him. He's look. I mean, ever since that 2010 season when Stafford had some bad injury, like really his first 2 years, he had knees and shoulders and all kinds of different problems those first couple of years. I mean, there's no questioning the guy's toughness. He's out on the field. He takes a pounding. Last year, he took a record number of sacks, his record at least. And he was out there for just about every snap. So, look, he's far from a perfect quarterback, right? I mean, I think the knock on him has always been whether he can beat some of the best teams on his schedule. He hasn't historically done that, so I think he still needs to make some growth as a player. But there's no doubt that he's made strides the last couple of years, and the Lions are really tailoring this offense to his liking. And
last question, obviously, thanks very much for your time. Obviously, very appreciative. He's on this long streak, 112 games. Should the worst come to worst, and he does actually miss games, what's the backup situation behind him like at present?
Well, it's hope and pray that doesn't happen is what it is for the Lions. I mean, now look, they signed Matt Castle this offseason, but I still think Jake Rudock is probably the backup at the end of the day. Castle was sort of the veteran guy that Matt Patricia knew. Bob Quinn knew they had some time with him in New England, so maybe there's a comfort level there. But Jake Rudock's the guy that's been taking backup snaps, at least in the open OTAs that we've seen so far. I think he's still, he's got a little bit of upside to him. He's never played. I mean, played a couple snaps last year, was the first real action that he's got, so nobody knows what he can be yet. But I know some people inside the organization think he can be a pretty decent player at least, so he would be the next man in. But look, if something bad happened to Matthew Stafford and he was going to miss a significant period of time, I think maybe the Lions would look out and see what other options are out there and see if there's somebody that's capable of leading this team long term and being able to steer this team to the playoffs.
It always reminds me the phrase that Tom Moore used when asked, why doesn't any of Peyton Manning's backups get more snaps? And he just said, well, if 18 goes down, we're screwed, and we don't practice screwed.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much with someone like Stafford. I think that's probably a similar message, isn't it?
Exactly. No, that's right. Look, I mean, this team, for all the changes they've made on defense, for having a new coach, for what they've done in the running game, they're going to go as far as Matthew Stafford can carry them. And again, Stafford he's shown some strides here the last couple seasons. He's 30 years old right now. He's entering his 10th NFL season, and obviously he's sort of starting his new contract right here this first year of the 5-year extension that he signed last fall. So this is a big year for Matthew Stafford. This is a big year for the Lions, and their futures are linked together for here and beyond.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic. Thanks very much for joining us, Dave. So you can follow Dave at Dave Birkett. Find his stuff at the Detroit Free Press. Dave, thanks very much for your time.
No problem. We'll do it again.
Neil Dutton, our boy, the Dut Bomb.
Delighted to be joined once again by Matt Harmon of NFL.com. Matt, thank you very much for joining. Just me, because obviously the other one can't be bothered.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to hopefully get past that and get over that sort of slight, but it might take some time. Okay. So, Paul and I we are on the fritz, our relationship at this point. But like I said, I'll try to put that behind me and just have a good show today,
Well, we'll certainly try. So we'll get straight into it. A player you've historically been fond of, John Brown, landed with the Ravens this year. In fact, it looks like the Ravens may have gone out of their way just to create the Matt Harmon appreciation offense. How do you like the fit in specifically for Brown? And do you think we are in for the second coming of John Brown with Ravens?
Well, yeah, the Ravens wide receiver core, you mentioned it's kind of stock full of ghosts of reception past. You look at Michael Crabtree, obviously is the number one receiver. They've got Willie Snead in the slot now, and then John Brown is kind of that wild card. I really liked, there was a video that the Ravens Twitter account put out about what Ozzie Newsome having the press conference with John Brown when they signed him. And, he mentioned that John Brown is not just a vertical threat. Obviously, that's what you like about him, but the fact that he can run the full route tree, which is why, as you mentioned, he's someone I've always been fond of. That ability to create across the route tree, not just on those vertical patterns, but to be able to separate really at every level. That's what I like so much about him. As to whether this is the second coming or not, I mean, it's all going to be dictated by health, I think, and who really knows. I do think it would be really fun to see Brown, operate in an offense, when and if Lamar Jackson does take over as a bit more of a vertical passer than what I think Joe Flacco has nowadays left to offer. So I don't know that we're going to see some big rebirth because of the health question, but if he gets on the field, I think he's a great fit as the kind of field stretcher and the number 2 there.
And moving on to another field stretcher that some believe may help put his team over the top, that'd be Brandon Cooks, obviously acquired by the Rams this off-season. From what I've read, you seem to be a little more restrained in your excitement over this move. Is there a chance that rather than coming in and becoming, the target hog that everyone else seems to think he is, that the Rams just use him the same way they used Sammy Watkins last year?
I have a tough time seeing where the surface level targets are going to come from Brandon Cooks there in LA. I mean, look, this is an offense that even dating back to Sean McVay's time in Washington, it's a spread it out unit. They don't just funnel the targets through one player. They've always, especially at the wide receiver position, kind of had different guys to play different roles. And I think the Rams receiver corps, from like a real football perspective, is set up incredibly well because they have a field stretcher in Brandon Cooks and a guy who can definitely make plays in space if you can get him a free release from press coverage. I don't think he is a number 1 receiver in the true sense of the word, but I do think he's obviously one of the best deep threats in the game. They have that position secured. They have kind of a flanker receiver in Robert Woods to be that possession guy, to run good outside routes and create some separation. I think he's probably their best separator on the team. Then they have a great big slot receiver in Cooper Kupp, who just runs a ton of routes against zone coverage, gets open, and creates these layup throws for Jared Goff there in LA. But, I have a tough time seeing any of these guys, crack 120, 130 targets with all the passing weapons that they have right now. And not to mention they're going to be a run-based team with a good defense. You never really project those teams to throw the ball a lot. So I think Cooks is probably going to be overdrafted in fantasy. And to be honest with you, I see a lot of these pass catchers going a little higher than I want to take them.
I've been writing about Gerald Everett for 2 years, and as you say, you're thinking, this is your break, right. This is the time to break out. But then you realise, no, they're going to be good. They're going to lean on the ground game with Gurley, and ultimately, we're just going to have to wait. And I don't wish this because they've been bad for a long time, but I would hope the Rams would be bad again, so that all these weapons in the passing game can finally, start to pay off for people.
Yeah, I forget about the tight ends too. It's a great thing to bring up. I mean, Gerald Everett was a guy they were really excited about to draft. Tyler Higbee kind of flashed at times last year. This is just a Rams offense that just has a ton of players to throw at, and it's tough to imagine one of them just blowing past everybody else.
From an offense with falling over itself with weapons to one that really, really was crying out for them. You tweeted earlier today or late yesterday about the consistency of Kelvin Benjamin with the Panthers and the Bills. From what you've seen, with reception perception and other research, is there anyone on the Bills who you think could be relevant in fantasy other than, well, they've got to throw to someone? Is there anything that people can hang the hat on in that particular offense?
Oof, it's ugly, man. Like, the Bills' offense on paper is tough to look at. They've jettisoned offensive linemen this year. They don't really have any true difference makers in the passing game. But, volume is king in fantasy, and I do think Kelvin Benjamin's a pretty decent candidate to push 130 targets this year because, Zay Jones, some of these guys there, Jeremy Curley, I don't think so, in terms of the wide receiver position there. I mean, maybe Zay Jones gets it back on track, but I don't think anybody has any confidence in that at this point. It's not going to be a good offense. It's probably not going to be a good passing offense, but I could see Kelvin Benjamin as flawed of a player, clearly as I think he is based on the information I shared that you're talking about. Not a great separator, below the 16th percentile in success rate versus man and press coverage in each of the last 2 years in reception perception. Don't think he's good at that. I think he creates a lot of low percentage throws for his quarterback, but again, I think there's a shot for him to get a lot of targets, and nobody's going to want to draft him. But if you take him as your wide receiver 4, or God, even your wide receiver 5, he's probably going to give you some weeks in blowout games.
Obviously, Benjamin's former team, the Carolina Panthers, have made a lot of changes to their offense, starting with bringing in new offensive coordinator Norv Turner. I forget who it was, and I'm really sorry because I'm doing them a disservice. But someone did point out that in the past in Norv's offense, the dig route, I think, is some of the routes that Devin Funchess has shown well in reception perception are routes that are staples of the Norv Turner offense. Do you think that Funchess could break out, as it were, this year, or is that another case of this offense has now got a lot of mouths to feed? The horrible cliche term, a lot of mouths to feed, and the hopes that Funchess could be a true number one probably aren't that high at the moment.
Yeah, somebody that's followed the Panthers for many years, it's kind of shocking to say, wow, they suddenly have a lot of intriguing players to throw to. But you're right, it is kind of a little bit of a crowded passing attack up top, with the addition of DJ Moore, Greg Olsen hopefully coming back healthy, and Christian McCaffrey obviously being someone that I think is going to push 70, 80 catches pretty much every year. It's tough to project the raw targets for Funchess to have that breakout season. But to me, there's a lot of, maybe DJ Moore is not ready to be the top receiver this year. I think that's totally within the realm of possibility. Maybe Greg Olsen is not, 100% coming off of kind of a season haunted by foot injuries last year. He's also an older player. I know they just extended him, but there's a chance we could see him drop off. So to me, Funchess has kind of a wide range of outcomes. I don't think there's a chance that he's totally... I do think he kind of started to break out last year. As you mentioned, really good success rates on digs, posts, which are going to be a feature of that Norv Turner offense. I really loved what I saw from him last year based on what I had charted from him in seasons prior. Again, I don't think he is a true number one receiver. I think DJ Moore will be the top guy there, potentially this year, but certainly probably the year coming in the next couple of years. But I do think Funchess, while he's not a perfect player, I do really like what I saw last year. And if he doesn't get too expensive, I'd be willing to take him just because I think this Panthers offense could be pretty good. And I do want some pieces of that. And I think that if certain things break right, he could easily be the top targeted player there. But it's just you could also see him fall to like 4th in the pecking order. So there's a wide range of outcomes here, and you got to be aware of that.
I mean, the one person who really excites me, and I really we've been burnt before, especially by rookie tight ends, is Ian Thomas. Just because he just looks, his hands look fantastic. There's a clip that Fran Duffy posted out for when he was at Indiana, and literally it was just ball, catch, go. He didn't even think about it. Just looked absolutely gorgeous. But you say he's a rookie. He's still very raw. He didn't play that often, and he's got Greg Olsen in front of him. So might have to pump my brakes on him, especially this year.
Yeah, no, this year I don't think you're looking for much, but that was a great pick to me because again, Olsen is older. He's had health problems. And Cam Newton he's had Olsen pretty much throughout the entirety of his career, and even that first season it was him and Jeremy Shockey. So the tight end position's always been kind of there with Cam, and I think it's nice for them to have someone that's actually intriguing to develop there, besides Ed Dixon or whatever. So yeah, it was a great pick. So I like it, but yeah, you're kind of looking much fantasy wise this year. Moving
on to another rookie, when you were charting Anthony Miller of the Bears, it seemed that he was fairly similar to Doug Baldwin, especially, say, from the reception perception viewpoint. With this in mind, do you think Miller could be successful as a rookie, and do the Bears potentially have an epic wide receiver duo with Miller and your other boy, Allen Robinson.
Yeah, no, Chicago, I mean, they've got to be right up there in the top 2 or 3 teams that have improved the most this offseason, and adding an intriguing player like Miller in the draft, which they pursued him with conviction. You know, they traded up for him. They really went after him. I think that's a great fit alongside Allen Robinson. They didn't really have a true slot receiver in that offense. Trey Burton is probably going to play some slot receiver, be a move tight end. Taylor Gabriel is a nice gadget player, but he took most of his snaps outside in the past 2 seasons. So I think it's really cool to see them go and attack that slot receiver position. And what I like so much about Miller, as you mentioned, reception perception, why he's similar to Doug Baldwin, is both those guys, while they're good, reliable slot receivers, they also win on vertical routes. All of those both those guys, Doug Baldwin and Anthony Miller, have really strong success rates on the post, the 9, the corner routes. So I think if Miller lines up inside, which I would expect him to do a majority of his snaps and routes, as an interior player, he's going to rip through zone coverages in the middle of the field, just like we see Doug Baldwin do to create big plays. Not like your typical slot receiver like the Julian Edelman, catch a 5-yard flat pass and run a couple routes and fall over and get a first down. This is a guy who's going to make big plays. So I really think that there's a lot of potential in that pass-catching group in Chicago.
Are there any other rookie wide receivers whose landing spot you really, really like? Or is there any that you looked at and thought, why have you taken him? Please end this before it begins.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of intriguing players. None that really just scream at you for fantasy, and I know that a lot of people are kind of down on this early wide receiver group because of some of these landing spots, like DJ Moore's blocked by some players in Chicago. Calvin Ridley's definitely going to fall behind Julio Jones in the pecking order, even though I love that spot from a real football perspective. One guy, obviously, is Michael Gallup. I think a lot of people are going to be intrigued with. Track him through the offseason. I mean, Jerry Jones said he has a week 1 role, which is like, that's great, Jerry. Really emphasize the competition, man. But there's a shot for him to get up there and be that X receiver alongside like Allen Hurns and Cole Beasley, that with Terrence Williams getting himself arrested. So I really like Michael Gallup. I think he's kind of exactly what that Dallas pass catching group needs, a solid separator in the Michael Crabtree mold, but a guy who can definitely win those 50-50 balls that they ask for in that offense. Kind of later across the line, I really like the landing spot of a Kiki Cutie. A guy who's another vertical threat, real fun player to watch. He's kind of similar to, not as good of a player, but similar to that Doug Baldwin, Anthony Miller discussion, that he was a guy who lined up in the slot a ton and ran a bunch of vertical routes. And that's going to be real fun to watch with Deshaun Watson there, who, talk about a guy who has no problems winging it downfield. So, and he's already getting some complimentary notes from DeAndre Hopkins in OTAs. So he's definitely he's a player to watch. I mean, this whole group, you could go kind of back and forth on a lot of guys that landed in intriguing spots.
And moving away from the wide receivers and more onto yourself, in the last 12 months, we've seen the end of the Backyard Banter podcast and the Fantasy Hipsters podcast. So, far from calling you a jinx, although you are the only constant in both of these, have you got any other podcast projects in the offing, or are you just going back to guesting on this medium?
Yeah, don't know that I have any independent podcasts I'll be launching anytime soon. This year's is going to be an interesting one. I think there's a lot of change coming, and I'm excited about it. So that's all I'll say on that right now. I'll leave it on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
We've spoken a number of times, obviously, about reception perception, but where can people find all your reception perception work for the coming season?
Yeah, really excited. Today is Thursday here in Los Angeles, and I don't know, probably different time and place there for you, Neil. But tomorrow morning, the Ultimate Draft Kit will be live with the fantasy footballers, and I'm partnered with them for the second year in a row to release my reception perception analysis. You're going to get data on over 50 NFL wide receivers, all these rookies we talked about. You'll get my evaluations on all of them, how I think they fit for the upcoming season, and you can find all of that at receptionperception.com. There will be a link to purchase the Ultimate Draft Kit, which maybe by the time you listen to this, it might already be out there, and it's definitely worth your time to check out.
So that's receptionperception.com. You can follow Matt you can follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Harmon _BYB, which obviously, as we know, is Boy Young Boy. Matt, thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully we will speak again soon.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Always happy to jump on.
Great work from Neil there, sorting out those 3 interviews with 3 amazing guests, 2 new ones, and an old favourite in Matt Harmon. We hope they all enjoyed it and didn't mind only speaking to Neil. That's it for this week's show. Bravo for Neil. That's 3 recordings you did on your own and managed to send to me without the world ending. So I applaud you for that. And I applaud me for doing the start, the finish, and all the editing. But I do that all the time anyway, so it doesn't matter that I'm in a different country. Hopefully we'll do this again next week. If we do, it will be Rainford versus Pune, so that will be so much fun. If not, we'll speak to you soon. This top guy, and I'm sure Neil as well, are well and truly out.